I could never have imagined that one day I would sit in my own living room, questioning everything about the marriage I thought was unshakable. When Emily and I exchanged vows 15 years ago in Boston, we promised each other a lifetime of love and trust. I believed we had something special. She was the lively dreamer who could brighten any room, and I was the steady, practical one who kept our feet on the ground. Together, we seemed to balance perfectly. Over the past year, though, something has changed. Not all at once, not in a dramatic, screaming match sort of way, but slowly, like the way water wears down a stone. And now, here I am, surrounded by the pieces of the life we built together, wondering when it all began to slip away. Emily works as an event coordinator, specializing in high-profile charity galas and corporate events in New York City. Her job has always been demanding, and for the most part, I admired her ability to juggle everything so effortlessly. But lately, her busyness has felt less like ambition and more like avoidance. I tried to dismiss it at first. Surely her career simply hit a busy season. But that excuse started to wear thin as her late nights became a pattern. It began subtly. Emily would come home later than usual, often brushing off my concerns with a quick explanation about clients who needed extra attention. "These corporate folks are relentless," she'd say, her tone laced with weary amusement as she kicked off her heels at the door. I believed her, because why wouldn't I? Relationships ebb and flow. They're not meant to stay in a perpetual state of bliss. Still, there were small moments that made my stomach tighten with unease. Our weekly Saturday brunch ritual, something we had cherished for years, suddenly stopped being a priority. At first, she'd apologize, claiming she was tied up with emergency prep meetings. Then, the apologies stopped altogether. I'd find myself sitting alone at Charlie's Diner, nursing coffee and watching the door, hoping she'd surprise me by walking in. She never did. Last Monday, I stumbled across a clue I couldn't ignore. Emily had left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter while she was showering. I only glanced at it by chance, but a message preview caught my attention. It read, "Meeting at 42 North. Usual time." It was strange. Emily's calendar and messages were always a precise account of her day-to-day, filled with meticulously scheduled work appointments and notes. This, however, was vague intentionally, so it seemed. Later that evening, I casually mentioned the location during dinner. "Hey, what's 42 North?" I asked, keeping my tone light as I passed her the breadbasket. Her reaction was subtle but telling. She froze for just a fraction of a second before brushing it off with a quick explanation. "Oh, it's nothing, just a code I use for private meetings with picky clients. They prefer discretion." The explanation was too neat, too rehearsed. But I didn't press her. Instead, I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. After all, trust was the foundation of everything we'd built, right? Then came more unsettling changes. Emily's phone became a constant companion, something she never let out of her sight. I'd catch her stifling a laugh at a text late at night, her face glowing in the dim light of the screen. She started dressing differently, too. Her usual polished but modest style had shifted towards something more daring. Sleek, figure-hugging dresses, bold red lipstick she hadn't worn in years. "New image for the client meetings," she said with a playful shrug one morning. Despite my growing unease, I stayed silent. Confrontation felt too final, too irreversible. Yet the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. Every late-night call, every cryptic message chipped away at my certainty. Emily had become someone I barely recognized, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my marriage, the life I'd built, was being rewritten without my consent. By the time Emily mentioned a charity gala, I was already feeling unsteady. The event, she said, had come up last minute, a replacement for another planner who had fallen ill. Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, as she detailed the importance of the event for networking. She didn't explicitly invite me, but left enough of a pause for me to offer. I decided against it, saying I'd prefer to stay home and let her shine. But to my surprise, she quickly suggested, "Why not come with me? It might be nice to get out together." That caught me off guard. Emily had been so secretive lately that her invitation felt suspicious, almost as if she were testing me. I hesitated, but finally agreed, if only to keep a closer eye on her. "Sure," I said, watching her closely for a reaction. "I'll be your plus one." The evening of the gala, Emily emerged from our room, looking stunning. Her black gown clung to her figure in a way that left me momentarily speechless. She had paired it with understated but striking diamond earrings I didn't recognize. She gave a soft twirl, asking me if she looked all right. I told her she looked breathtaking, though the words felt weighted with the unspoken. Was this elegance for me, or for someone else? At the gala, Emily seemed to morph into a version of herself I didn't recognize. She floated through the crowd effortlessly, laughing and engaging in animated conversations with strangers, colleagues, and potential clients. She had always been charming, but tonight, her charm seemed heightened, deliberate. I tried to stay by her side, but she drifted away repeatedly, mingling with an ease that left me feeling like an outsider in her world. Dinner brought little respite. Emily sat beside me, but seemed preoccupied, her gaze flickering toward her phone whenever she thought I wasn't watching. Then, something strange happened. She adjusted her dress frequently, especially the fabric over her thighs. It was a small thing at first, but as she shifted, I noticed the unusual absence of any undergarments. My stomach twisted, and my mind raced. Was this a fashion choice? Practicality for the gown? Or something more deliberate? Something meant for someone else? The evening stretched on, each moment adding another layer to my unease. Emily excused herself after dessert, claiming she needed to touch up her makeup. I waited patiently at first, sipping the remains of my wine, but after 15 minutes, concern, or was it suspicion, got the better of me. I wandered through the venue, searching for her among the sea of gowns and tuxedos. She wasn't in the restroom. She wasn't near the bar. Finally, I stepped out into the garden area, a quiet space draped in soft string lights. That was where I found her. Emily stood by a secluded bench, her silhouette framed by the glow of the lights. She wasn't alone. A man, a tall, broad-shouldered figure in a sleek suit, stood beside her. His hand rested lightly on her arm as they spoke. Though they weren't touching intimately, the space between them felt charged, their body language too familiar, too comfortable. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw Emily's expression. Her lips curved in a smile that wasn't for me. It was private, secretive. I froze, my chest tightening with the realization of what I was witnessing. Confronting them felt impossible. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked back inside, my thoughts a whirlwind of anger and heartbreak. By the time Emily returned to our table, she was all composure, her smile as bright and carefree as ever. "Sorry," she said lightly, brushing her hair back. I ran into an old colleague. Got caught up chatting. I nodded, forcing myself to smile. "No problem," I lied. But inside, my emotions were anything but calm. The next day, the image of Emily with that man refused to leave my mind. It haunted me, replaying over and over like a cruel loop. Still, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something irrefutable. Later that week, while Emily was out, I took another look at her planner. My heart raced as I flipped through the digital calendar, searching for anything unusual. That was when I saw it again. 42 North, listed for the coming Saturday. No details, no notes. Just the cryptic name. This time, I didn't ask her about it. I decided to find out for myself. On Saturday morning, Emily left the house dressed casually. Jeans, a light sweater, and sneakers. She kissed me on the cheek, saying she had a client meeting at a venue. I watched her drive away, then grabbed my keys and followed. Keeping a safe distance, I tailed her car out of the city and into the suburbs. She eventually turned onto a quiet road that led to a small parking lot near a wooded trailhead. My heart sank as I parked a short distance away, and watched her get out of the car. She wasn't alone. A man I didn't recognize, shorter than the one from the gala, with a rugged, outdoorsy look, met her with a broad smile. They embraced briefly before heading down the trail together, their body language suggesting more than professional familiarity. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel tightly, as a wave of anger and despair crashed over me. This wasn't work. This wasn't a client meeting. Emily had lied to me again, and now I had proof. But knowing the truth didn't make it any easier to bear. Hours later, Emily returned home, her cheeks flushed from the crisp autumn air. She greeted me with a casual smile, asking how my day had been. I watched her, wondering how she could lie so easily, so convincingly. My mind raced with questions, accusations, and the bitter weight of betrayal. That evening, I decided I could no longer stay silent. By the time Emily returned home that evening, I was teetering on the edge of my breaking point. The memory of her walking down that trail with the stranger replayed in my mind like a relentless loop, each image sharpening my resolve. I had spent the entire day cycling through waves of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. Now, as she stepped through the door, her cheeks rosy from the autumn air, I knew I could not avoid the inevitable any longer. "Hey," she said with a casual warmth, setting her purse on the counter. "How was your day?" Her tone was light, untroubled, as though nothing had changed between us. That made my chest tighten with anger. I looked up from the couch, struggling to keep my voice steady. "How was the hike?" I asked, my tone deliberately neutral. Emily froze. It was barely perceptible, a slight hesitation as she removed her jacket, but I noticed. "It was fine," she said lightly, her smile unwavering. "The venue is perfect. I think the clients are going to love it." Her lie hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I stood and crossed the room slowly, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "Really? Because I happened to take a drive today. Ended up near a trailhead out by 42 North. I'll let the words sink in before adding. Imagine my surprise when I saw you there. With him." Emily's face drained of color. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights, her usual composure shattered. Then, just as quickly, her expression hardened. "You followed me?" she said, her voice tinged with indignation. "Do not do that," I snapped, my voice sharper than I intended. "Do not try to turn this around on me. I saw you, Emily. I saw you with him. Who is he? And do not lie to me." Her mouth opened as if to respond, but no words came out. Finally, she looked away, her shoulders slumping as though the weight of the truth was too heavy to bear. "His name is Ryan," she said quietly. "He is an event coordinator. We met at a conference last year." "And?" I prompted, my heart pounding in my chest. "What exactly are you doing with him?" Emily hesitated, her eyes welling up with tears. "It is not what you think," she said finally. "We're just friends. He has been going through a lot, and I was trying to be there for him." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. "Friends? Is that what you call sneaking off to the woods with another man? Holding hands? Lying to your husband about where you are?" Her tears spilled over as she shook her head. "It is not like that. It is complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You lied to me, Emily. You have been lying for months. Do you even understand what this has done to me? To us?" "I did not mean for it to happen," she said, her voice breaking. "I never planned for any of this." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So, it is true," I said, my voice hollow. "You cheated." Emily's tears fell harder now, and she reached for my hand, but I stepped back. "It was not physical," she said desperately. "I swear, Luke, it never got to that point, and I am supposed to believe that?" I shot back, my voice trembling with anger and pain. "After all the lies, all the sneaking around? How am I supposed to believe anything you say?" "I was lonely," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of her confession. "You have been so distant lately, so caught up in your routines and work. I felt invisible, like I did not matter to you anymore." Her words stung, cutting deep into the vulnerable parts of me I had tried to protect. But they did not excuse what she had done. So instead of talking to me, you decided to find comfort in someone else? I demanded. You betrayed me, Emily. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? To see my wife with another man and realize I have been a fool this whole time. I am sorry, she sobbed, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Luke. I do. Her words felt hollow, like they could not reach the parts of me that had been shattered. You love me? I said bitterly. Is that what you call this? Because it does not feel like love, Emily. It feels like betrayal. She sank into a chair, her face buried in her hands as she cried. I do not know how to fix this, she said between sobs. But I want to try. Please, Luke, let me prove to you that I can change. I stood there, staring at the woman I had loved for so many years, now a stranger before me. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away, to leave and never look back. But something held me there, tethered by the memories of the life we had built together. I need time, I said finally, my voice cold and distant. I need to figure out if there is anything left to fix. Emily nodded, her tears streaming silently down her face. I will wait, she said softly. I will do whatever you need. I did not answer. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force. That night, I drove aimlessly through the city, the streets blurred by the tears I refused to let fall. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to escape the suffocating weight of what had just happened. For the first time in our marriage, I felt completely and utterly lost. Leaving the house that night felt like tearing away a part of myself. The silence in my car was suffocating, broken only by the occasional sound of my labored breathing as I struggled to process everything. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Boston, the city lights blurring together as my thoughts spiraled. Emily's tear-streaked face was all I could see, her words echoing in my mind. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Luke. Love. The word felt hollow now, its meaning twisted by her betrayal. What kind of love does this? What kind of love leads to lies, to late-night calls, to secret meetings in the woods with another man? The questions gnawed at me, each one cutting deeper than the last. The first few days after our confrontation passed in a haze. I stayed away from the house as much as possible, unable to face Emily or the memories that clung to every corner. I slept in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, the lumpy mattress and thin walls doing little to provide comfort. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her standing by that bench with Ryan, her body language screaming a truth she hadn't been able to admit. Work was out of the question. I called in sick, though my voice on the phone probably gave away the real reason. My colleagues left concerned messages, but I ignored them all. What could I say? That my wife, the woman I'd built my life around, had betrayed me in a way I wasn't sure I could recover from? I spent most of my time sitting in that dingy motel room, staring at the walls and replaying the last few months in my mind. How had I missed it? Were there signs I should have seen earlier? And more importantly, had I contributed to this? Emily's words about feeling invisible stuck with me, even as they made my blood boil. Had I really been so distant that she felt the need to seek comfort elsewhere? The self-doubt was suffocating. Every question led to another, each one more painful than the last. I felt like a failure, not just as a husband, but as a person. The life I'd built, the love I thought was unbreakable, had been exposed as a fragile illusion. On the third day, my best friend, Mark, showed up unannounced. He'd apparently called Emily after I failed to answer his texts, and she told him I was staying at a motel. I didn't even bother asking how she knew where I was. Mark knocked loudly until I opened the door, his expression a mix of concern and exasperation. "Get dressed," he said, shoving a bag of takeout into my hands. "You're not going to sit here and wallow. Not on my watch." I didn't have the energy to argue, so I let him drag me out to his car. We ended up at his apartment, where he handed me a beer and let me vent while we ate. For the first time in days, I felt a small measure of relief, like I wasn't drowning alone. She said it wasn't physical. I muttered, staring at the label on my beer bottle. But how am I supposed to believe her? She lied to me for months, Mark. Months. And now she expects me to just take her word for it. Mark listened silently, nodding occasionally as I poured out everything. The cryptic messages, the changes in her behavior, the moment I saw her with Ryan. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Look, man, he said, you don't have to make any decisions right now. But you do need to figure out what you want. Do you want to try and fix things? Or is it time to walk away? I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know if I can forgive her. And even if I could, how do I trust her again? Mark didn't have an answer for that, and honestly, I wasn't sure there was one. But just talking to someone who wasn't Emily made me feel a little less lost. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, I began to rebuild a semblance of normalcy. I returned to work, though my focus was non-existent. My coworkers noticed, of course, but no one pressed me for details. I appreciated their silence more than I could express. The last thing I needed was pity. Emily texted me several times during those weeks, each message carefully worded and filled with apologies. I know I've hurt you, one of them read, but I want to make this right. Please, can we talk? I ignored most of them, unable to face the flood of emotions her name brought up. But eventually, I knew I couldn't avoid her forever. If we were going to move forward, whether that meant reconciliation or separation, we needed to have an honest conversation. When I finally agreed to meet, it was at a neutral location, a small cafe near the park where we used to walk our dog back when things were simpler. Emily arrived first, sitting at a corner table with a cup of tea in front of her. She looked pale and tired, her usually impeccable makeup understated, as if she hadn't had the energy to apply it properly. Thank you for coming, she said softly when I sat down. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. The silence between us was heavy, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down like a physical force. I know I've ruined everything, Emily began, her voice trembling. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you, Luke. What I did, it was selfish and wrong, and I hate myself for it. Her words stirred something in me. Anger, yes, but also a deep, aching sadness. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to hold on to the love we'd shared, even if it felt impossibly out of reach. But could I? Why, Emily? I asked finally. Why not come to me if you were feeling so alone? She looked down at her tea, her hands trembling. I was scared, she admitted. Scared you wouldn't care. Scared you'd think I was being needy or ungrateful. Ryan listened. He made me feel seen. The words stung, each one driving home the depth of the distance that had grown between us. But they also forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. I hadn't been the husband Emily needed. That didn't excuse her actions, not by a long shot, but it added a layer of complexity to my anger. By the time we left the cafe, I still didn't have answers. I wasn't sure if I could forgive Emily, or if I even wanted to try. But for the first time, I felt like we were beginning to peel back the layers of hurt and misunderstanding that had brought us to this point. Walking out of that cafe, I felt as though I had left a piece of myself behind. The weight of our conversation lingered heavily on my shoulders as I wandered aimlessly through the park. The questions Emily's words had stirred refused to settle. Could we salvage the wreckage of our marriage? Did I even want to? And if not, what came next for me? Over the following days, I tried to untangle the knot of emotions that had taken residence in my chest. Anger, betrayal, sadness. They were all there, swirling endlessly, but so was something else. A flicker of hope. Despite everything, I couldn't shake the memories of the life Emily and I had built together, the love that had been real for so many years. But I also couldn't ignore the fact that the foundation of that love had been cracked, perhaps irreparably. Emily reached out again a few days later, asking if we could talk further. This time, I agreed to meet her at our home. Sitting across from her in the living room we had once filled with laughter and shared dreams, I found it hard to reconcile this version of her, contrite, vulnerable, with the woman I had seen laughing in the woods with another man. "I want to go to counseling," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to understand why I did what I did, and I want to rebuild what we've lost. But I can't do it alone, Luke. I need you. I need us to try." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with sincerity. For the first time, I saw how deeply she was struggling, not just with the consequences of her actions, but with the choices that had led her there. And as much as I wanted to be angry, to hold on to the safety of my resentment, I couldn't deny that part of me still cared. Part of me still wanted to believe in the possibility of us. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I admitted, my voice raw. "I don't even know if I want to. But if we're going to try, it has to start with complete honesty. No more lies, Emily. About anything." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I promise," she whispered. "I'll tell you everything." The next few hours were some of the hardest of my life. Emily laid bare the truth of her relationship with Ryan. The texts, the meetings, the emotional intimacy they had shared. She insisted it had never crossed into physical infidelity, but the depth of their connection was undeniable. It was like watching someone dismantle the scaffolding of my trust, piece by painful piece. For the first time, I confronted my own shortcomings as well. I admitted to Emily how I had taken her for granted, how I had retreated into my routines and neglected the emotional connection we once shared. It wasn't an excuse for what she had done, but it was a step toward understanding how we had both contributed to the erosion of our marriage. We agreed to start counseling, though I wasn't sure it would lead to reconciliation. All I knew was that I needed clarity about my feelings, about our future, and about whether we could ever truly rebuild what had been broken. Counseling was harder than I imagined. Each session felt like peeling back layers of scar tissue, exposing wounds I had tried to ignore for years. Emily was unflinchingly honest about her loneliness and her mistakes, and I was forced to confront the ways I had withdrawn emotionally, leaving her to fend for herself. Our therapist, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Mayfield, helped us navigate the minefield of our pain, but progress was slow and uneven. Some days, I left our sessions feeling cautiously optimistic, as though we were finding a way to bridge the gap between us. Other days, the hurt was too fresh, too raw, and I questioned whether I had the strength to keep going. Emily was patient, giving me space when I needed it and offering her support without pushing. It was a side of her I hadn't seen in years, a willingness to fight for us that felt genuine, even if I wasn't sure it would be enough. Outside of counseling, I focused on rebuilding my own sense of identity. I started running again, something I hadn't done since my college days. At first, it was just a way to burn off the anger and restlessness that seemed to follow me everywhere. But over time, it became a source of clarity. There was something about the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement, the steady cadence of my breath, that helped me sort through my thoughts. I also leaned heavily on my friends, particularly Mark. He was a constant presence, offering support without judgment. On more than one occasion, he dragged me out of my apartment to grab a beer or catch a game, reminding me that life existed beyond the confines of my marriage. Through it all, I began to rediscover parts of myself I had forgotten, interests and passions that had been overshadowed by the routines of married life. I took up photography, exploring the city with a camera in hand, and finding beauty in places I had once overlooked. I even reconnected with an old college friend who introduced me to a hiking group, something I never would have considered before. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like my own person again. Months passed, and Emily and I continued to work through our issues in counseling. There were moments of real connection, glimmers of the bond we had once shared. But there were also moments when the weight of the past felt insurmountable, when the trust we were trying to rebuild seemed like a fragile house of cards. In the end, I realized that forgiveness was possible, but reconciliation was not. I could see that Emily was truly remorseful and committed to change, but the cracks in our foundation were too deep. Too much had been said, too much had been done, and I couldn't ignore the toll it had taken on my heart. One evening, after yet another counseling session, I sat Emily down in our living room. The same space where we had laughed, fought, and dreamed together now felt like the setting for our final chapter. "I forgive you," I said, my voice steady despite the lump in my throat. "But I don't think I can stay. We've both changed too much, and I think it's time we let each other go." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand," she whispered. "I'll always love you, Luke. I hope you know that." "I know," I said softly. "And I'll always care about you, too. But sometimes love isn't enough." The weeks that followed were bittersweet. I moved into a small apartment downtown, filling it with pieces of my new life. A camera on the shelf, running shoes by the door, photos from hikes with my new friends. The silence was different here, not oppressive like before. It felt like freedom. Looking back, I see Emily's betrayal as a turning point. Not the end of my story, but the beginning of a new chapter. It forced me to confront my own flaws, to rediscover who I was outside of my marriage. And while the pain of losing what we had will always linger, I've learned that healing is possible. Life is messy, unpredictable, and often unfair. But it's also full of second chances, new beginnings, and unexpected joy. And for the first time in a long time, I feel ready to embrace it. What would you do if you discovered a betrayal like this in your own relationship? Would you fight to rebuild the trust, or would you walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective.